Ladies and gentlemen, gender nonconforming and trans deities, thank yourself for tuning in to the Hoodoisie. That's right. Sit back, relax, get possessed, and grab a bottle of your favorite spirit or a non-alcoholic beverage if you are on them 12 steps, and collect this live stream off your LCD screen and get radical with the Hoodoisie. The Hoodoisie is keeping it radical in a time of Corona. And to do that, we teamed up with Southside Weekly to bring you Pandemic Issues. Pandemic Issues are weekly episodes that we bring to you every Wednesday that is giving you the stories and the analysis that local corporate and bigger media will not. You know, when I say like, I hate saying like mainstream media or like things like that, because then I sound a little bit like Trump, who's always talking about the corporate mainstream media. So it's like, I got to tweak that intro. I also, I'm Ricardo Gamboa, or Ricardo Gamboa, your host. I have not shaved in months to remind myself that there's more things important than how you look during a pandemic. But now I just look like gay Latino Wolverine. But I'm classing it up with my little robe right over here. I'm gonna let my co-hosts introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Charles Press. Oh, go ahead.
This happens every week. They still haven't figured it out.
we got to decide on something. I'm Charles Preston. I do audience engagement for Injustice Watch, Radical Space Maker, activist, online troll, whatever.
Nice. Yeah. So this is Jackie Serrato, editor-in-chief of the Southside Weekly. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
That's right. And tonight we are talking about school during and after COVID-19. And we have some awesome guests that we're so excited to speak with this evening. From University of Illinois, Professor of African American Studies, we got Dr. David Stovall. Let's give it up for David Stovall. Let's do some emojis, clap, unmute, whatever you want.
The whole John. Yeah, I was trying to throw my little piece up. Thank y'all again for having me.
Yeah. Nice. And then we have the face, the muscle, the beauty, the brains of the Chicago Teachers Union, fierce warrior woman, goes by Nubia on Twitter. Let's give it up for Stacy Davis Gates.
Hey.
And we have a CPS teacher. You know, over the years as a teaching artist, I have worked in dozens and dozens of schools, and I've worked with, that means dozens of teachers, and trying to figure out, who's a teacher we can have on this show. And I thought about who's one of the teachers that I know that's most passionate about teaching and has some of the most forward politics. And I was like, oh, that's also my cousin. And so we got my cousin Alicia Torres, that's also a teacher for 17 years in CPS at Sorowana Academy on the South Side. Right. Let's give it up for Alicia.
No doubt.
Hey.
Right. So let's get into it, right? I know there's a lot of people that were excited for the show. I know we got messages in our inbox and people hollering. And so I think one of the things that when I think about teachers, right, who are the heroes for so many children, I know for me, I was someone that school was one of the safe places that I had, for me growing up. And then I think about Stacy and David, who are kind of like activists and like social justice heroes, in Chicago. I think one of the things that, we forget about is like, y'all are people too, right? And so I guess how I want to kind of start it off is, how have you seen this pandemic kind of affect your lives and change your lives? And then how have you seen it kind of affect and change the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I can start. I think the thing that has changed, this thing around being confined, I just started personally. I've always found it tough to work from home. And this moment is really made me reflect around, well, we have to think about those who are houseless, housing insecure, and then really thinking about what does it mean for folks who have historically been isolated to even be more isolated. So that's really had an effect on me in terms of thinking about how do we get to the folks who have historically had minimal access. So this thing around really starting to think about that and then being out of contact with folks. A good friend of mine is a bus driver. He contacted COVID-19 early on. Another homie got it. So it's this thing around really thinking about it in real spaces. It's a whole, you're in an entirely different world. When I went to my parents' back porch and all four of us, myself, my partner, and my parents, are in masks, standing 6 feet apart from each other, right? I mean, it's a different thing when you hear about social distancing, but then when it's happening, you're in the face of your mother in this context. It was a whole nother piece to understand, like, this is a different time and a different moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've grown more impatient. I think that is probably the worst part for people who work for me. God bless y'all for putting up with me, by the way, if you were watching. But my impatience has grown exponentially because now it's like life or death. I remember the intensity of October and the strike, and feeling very responsible, accountable for, our members, their families, the families we serve, and everything that's happening at that time. I really and truly believe, like, now, like, the work that we're doing as a labor union is about, like, providing safety, demanding safety that's actually going to keep people alive, right? You think about what has happened in New York City, where over 50 school employees have passed away, right? So think about if we were in the school communities past March 13th, what could have potentially happened. Think about if we were not bold enough to draw, like, real clear lines in the sand about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. The decisions that you make in our space at the Chicago Teachers Union are already very heavy, because we have a school district that's 90% students of color. We have a school district where we're dealing with students who come from impoverished backgrounds. We have tens of thousands of students who are without shelter. And so it's not just the advocacy and what we say, it's the consideration of what we say. It's the policies that we help to create and that we advocate for and how we do it. And now that has gotten a lot heavier. Think about it, 90% students of color with a pandemic that has disproportionately impacted those very people, right? To not only are you dealing with the impact of the virus itself, but death, right? I'm thinking of Unique, the 31-year-old postal worker who just had a child, who already has two. Those children are in someone's daycare, they're in someone's after school program, they're in someone's school. So we're gonna deal with a lot. And so it's pressure, it's anxiety ridden. Heck, I'm a mother, and I have the inside information about the schools. So, but I'm also thankful because I'm here, I'm talking to you, I have an income, I have a home, we eat every day. I'm blessed.
Yeah, Alicia, you want to take it?
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest things that have changed in my life since this has begun is the merging of my professional life and my personal life, right? All of that has come together into one space. And it hasn't been exactly the smoothest coming together. So, I mean, I came home with bags of things, teacher bags, of course, always have a ton of bags, but I felt like I had even extra. And I set up in my kitchen. I've set up in my basement. I set up in a corner of my basement. Now I've cleared out a room and I'm in another office space. Like, it's constantly changing still. And I think that's like the biggest change, because, when you start the school year, you've got a system, you've got it going, and you're going to keep going through. And this is not the way I usually do. So it's just been like, and then also understanding that my family's here with me, right? I used to be able to go into work, check in at work, have that, vision of what my day is going to look like and what's going to pan out. And then I'd go home and I'd be able to leave that at work, come home, spend time with my family, do dinner, do homework after school, our family activities for before bedtime. and then put them to bed. And then of course, because I'm just
hold on, wait. But I just feel like this is not honest, because there's not been a time where I've ever texted you or during the weekday and you are not doing some teacher shit still. It's like grading, doing some work, doing some decorations that you're gonna show your kids.
It is a lot of multitasking, but I do try to, like, you know, it's come together much more. So, and it's even come to a point, like my 3-year-old, he's not in school yet. He is now seeing everything that I do, right? And usually that's being done when he's in bed and I have my time for him. Now it's, all right, look what mommy's doing. He wants to figure it out. And just even being, you know, a delegate at my school too, I'm constantly looking up information and trying to make sure I'm keeping everyone informed, keeping myself informed, because then I think about what they're going through too. If I'm doing all this, what are they doing? And I know I'm like the night owl at my school, like I'm the one who's always up late doing stuff. So I, you know, now that's even extended later into the nights. Unfortunately, like I'm up till 2 or 3 in the morning. And sometimes it is just like taking a moment to sit and be, because I need to consider like what's going on. Sometimes I do just spend that last hour before bed, just like, what am I going to try and do tomorrow? What families do I need to reach out to? How can I adjust my teaching so it's better for the students and their families? And that's a constant reflection I did in the classroom, but I'm doing it more now. So everything is just heightened. I feel like I'm at hyper warp speed. So it's been interesting.
I think one of the things I'm really thinking about, and I kind of really want to dive into this, right? Because, you know, we're talking about school, we're talking about education, and this has already been contentious stuff in the city, right? It was just, you know, 7 months ago, and it's repeated contentious stuff in the cities, right? It's almost like every other year, teachers have to go on strike, and the CTU has to take the city to task to be like, yo, like give us the resources that we need, right? And you know, teachers have a hard time, right? We know that teacher retention can be an issue in CPS schools, right? Students are having a hard time. We know, you know, so many CPS high school students kind of leave CPS, right? And so each of you kind of occupy a very kind of interesting space in relation, you know, related to that. Stacy, like, you know, we think about the CTU, and especially since kind of core is, you know, ascended, and the way they've kind of been using bargaining for the collective good, drawing attention to the total well-being of, you know, of students, and that advocacy work you've been doing. Alicia, you know, the teaching that you're doing with our young people, which are in some of their most formative years, right? Or, you know, in early childhood. And then David, the work that you do around being, you know, around education and your kind of history of activism around schools. So given like where, you know, who you are in your relationship to this, what is the stuff that you are like, yo, people need to get, this is what is going on, and this is what is at stake. Here's what's actually playing out. Let's take it. This is the weird thing about Zoom, is like it's always like negotiating who's gonna go. Let me have.
So I'll go. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the belly of a revolution, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And I think it's difficult for people to acknowledge, because oftentimes we romanticize the history of revolution because we wasn't there, right? You know, we were not there for it. That being said, we're in one. And so I think it's important for us to name it, to be very clear that this is what is happening, and then get into formation. We don't have to read any more books. We don't have to have any more book study. Maybe some people do, and I'm not fronting on y'all who are doing it. I just need you. I just need us to do both and. So what does that mean? It means that we have to see the ability, like the economy can shut down. It has shut down. And so we have that ability. We also know that workers are holding up this America that we often, you know, critique. And not just workers, women, Black women, and Latinx women. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the hospital, when you go to the doctor's office, right? When you get your mail, these are the workers who are holding things down. The warehouses, you know, because you're ordering from Amazon or Instacart, or all of those things are being held down by particular people. The work of right now is clarifying who should lead, who should have voice, who should have strategic importance. And it's going to be up to places like the Chicago Teachers Union and other organized labor groups who understand that coalition work is the only way forward, that we have to share power with communities of color, and not just share it to give them a microphone, share it to give them strategy and leadership, but also clarify like we're connected. Like, I'm not just talking about a postal worker, I'm talking about one of my students' parents. I'm not just talking about an undocumented immigrant. I am literally talking about the parents that populate our school communities. So when we're making phone calls home, like Alicia just talked about, to check on folks, we're not just checking on folks, we're radicalizing and organizing folks to a better normal, because I'm not going back to the same normal. It's impossible anyway. That's over. It's either going to get better or it's going to get worse.
Mm-hmm. Your mic, David.
Yeah, and I can just jump in on that. And thank you, Stacy, for actually reminding us that we are in the middle of something. And I think when we actually take that into account, then we have to move differently, because now this thing is in front of our faces, but we see this very narrow window that we can actually engage and see that now because this work is being done, because things are happening on the backs of folks, those folks can shake off power and make a decision to shut everything down. I mean, like, what are you going to do, right? When El Guedo closes down, when Mariano's closes down, when you ain't getting a package, right, for something that you probably don't even need. But what happens when these things shut down? Where are folks going to go? And now, because the power is rested in that group of people, we have to demonstrate a commitment to them. And I think, to your earlier point, Ricardo, and I think this is where we have to come to grips with things around living life here in these places that we call the United States. America has only proven itself to be what it has always been: a place founded on genocide, slavery, wrongful land appropriation, and late-stage capitalism aimed at the exploitation of everyday folk, right? And we're just seeing it in real time. And now we're seeing it in a way that's so visceral, right? That's hitting home, that's hitting us in our everyday practices. Now is the opportunity to say, we can shift some things, right? But the window is small. If we're going to move, we need to move now. Because when that window shifts, we're going to be back to this false narrative around things being back to normal. Depending on your location in life in the United States, things has never been normal, right? It has always been some space that has exploited you, that has dehumanized you, that has actually taken you away from doing the things that you've set out to do. So I think this thing right now is this moment for folks to begin to move in ways that allow us to rethink who is prioritized, because we're seeing power is going apeshit crazy. I mean, you got a dude talking about ingesting bleach or some shit. I mean, what bizarro world are we in right now? Right. And then then he shuts off the dude who actually does infectious disease work and won't even let him talk. Like, what are we in right now? So there is nothing to look for at the top. There is no there. It is only us. Mm-hmm. And because it's only us, I think that's how we have to move.
Yeah, I think it's important that as teachers too, we continue to advocate for our students and their families, right? We have to continue to reach out and make sure that they're able to have what they need, or what is it that they need, because so many of our working families, right? And they're working, and single moms are working, single parent homes. So I just keep thinking about, like, what can I do as a teacher in order to continue to support, and also try and get them organized so that they can get these resources, and how do, me giving that information to them and making sure they're staying informed on what it is they need in order to be in this time, and we can get together to make it better when we return back.
Alicia, I think one of the things I'm interested in, like as a teacher, right? Like, you know, we've heard, like, you know, just 7 months ago, right? Teachers were on strike to saying like, we need resources, right? Students need resources, right? Like students need nurses, students need social workers. They're definitely going to need them, you know, if we ever, you know, once one shelter in place is over and we go back to school, right? And so I can only imagine what are some of the transformation that you see, you know, of what a classroom looks like now and what students are going through right now. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. You know, students are going through a lot right now, and I just keep thinking about their families and what classrooms were before, right? We were teaching our students and we communicated with families as often as we could. But I still feel now at this moment that we could have done more. And that's something that I want to do when we go back is what more can we do to engage families and not just engage them, but really make them partners in education so that I hope that we don't have to do this again, but if we are doing this again, how can we better give parents better tools so that when they're home with their children, they're able to support their learning just as well as if they were in school? And I know it won't be the same, right? So I feel like that information, that kind of training, I hope, you know, when I go back that we can figure out some sort of plan where we can have parents in more often. They can even be in the classroom with us because I want them to see what I am doing with them. I'm doing it now. Now that I've been doing this from home, I'm sending videos and saying, this is how it should look like. And fortunately, I can use my son to be the model student for me and do it back and forth. So parents have an idea of what this sounds like, what this looks like.
And if he acts up, you could be like, you ain't getting to watch Scandal tonight. Maybe your son is not the type of young 7-year-old boy that loves Scandal like me, but yeah. Stacy, I saw you taking some notes right there. What were you thinking about?
Well, because I think this is the part of the work that we are doing right now. Look, Alicia went from being in front of her students with a whiteboard to being in front of her students, you know, on Zoom, like literally overnight. So she's figuring out how to create a curriculum, how to instruct a curriculum in a medium that she hasn't been requisitely trained on. So she's figuring all of this newness out. So are our students, so are our parents. And it's a very frustrating situation to like be in the middle of learning something new while people are just dropping dead every day. I think today was the day that has had the highest casualties in Illinois. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you just think about how we are still managing in this moment. I just want to shout out all of the workers, you know, especially our members at the CTU and the Illinois Federation of Teachers who are like figuring out how to maintain in the middle of a pandemic and create. So that's number one. I think we don't talk about how stressful that is. And teachers are like perfectionists and they are having a really hard time with this imperfection right now, like keeping it on a one they are. But two, this whole concept of being able to think through what do we need to do better? Because the reality of the science is that we won't have a vaccine to 2021. And that it's not the first wave, it could be the second wave, it could be the third wave that could even perhaps be deadlier than the one that we're dealing with now. So if we're thinking about what the scientists are telling us, then we should also be thinking about what Alicia is telling us. How are we having webinars to develop parents? How are we having webinars to develop our teachers? How are we having webinars to shift the focus of our support staff to supporting families and doing this work, right? We're all learning how to do something very different at a time of mass chaos. But let me tell you about mass chaos. This is what the capitalists live for, because this is how they find their power. So I am in a position now where we better speed up and find our power of what our innovation is, because Bill Gates and Cuomo up in New York have figured out that we're going to reimagine education without any educators. We're going to reimagine education with the same creeps that like gave us Common Core, gave us standardized testing, shut our schools down, disenfranchised Black people and brown people even more. We can find out what our innovation is. And what I think Alicia is telling us as a classroom teacher is that our innovation is a stronger collaboration with our families.
David, you talked about the small window, the small opportunity. You say like this is an urgent moment that we're in, and there's a small opportunity to organize around. What is that small opportunity? Can you get more into that?
Yeah, I think to the point that Stacy and Alicia raised, because we've been shifted into this thing that we really haven't seen, now it's some spaces to really kind of key up on some things that we've never really needed. And an example of that is standardized testing, right? We know that standardized testing is rooted in eugenics, is rooted in the dehumanization of Black, brown, and indigenous people. And it has no demonstrated measure that it will improve learning, right? So we know this thing to be real. So now, if we know this thing to be real, we can actually stop it right in its tracks. We can eliminate all standardized testing from the local schoolhouse to the state of Illinois, right? Because now we see that it has no purpose in the current moment, but it's never had a purpose. It's only been used to wrongfully sort people. So I think these things now are having us revisit this moment of opportunity, is allowing us to revisit these things that we've known we never really needed, that were just imposed on us by way of capitalists. I was in grade school in the 80s. I remember there was one test, right? And there was one test you took at one time in the year. That was it. Now, you got young folks, depending on the school that they're in, you're getting assessed 7 to 10 times a week, right? And what does that do for learning? Nothing, right? And everybody in that building knows that it does nothing for learning. So now, in this brief window of opportunity, we have the chance to get rid of it for good and to fight the capitalists, the Pearsons of the world, who actually have so many standardized tests fluctuating in many states, to say, look, you've never really measured anything but how well a young person takes a test according to your own data. And I think that's really important. So Pearson says, look, this is what we measure. We measure how well a young person takes a test. That's about it. We can't tell you how they will learn in the future. We can't tell you if they are the next human to change all of our conditions. We don't know that. We just know how well they take a test. And now, if we're talking about things that families, if we base our education around what families need, now we throw those things out that have never done right by us. So I think this is that opportunity to actually engage in something like that, that makes total and perfect sense, and ask a larger question about what has been imposed on folks that actually has no academic grounding in anything. So I think that's an example of this small window that we can actually engage and shift our conversation around what's happening in the schoolhouse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about that. Jax, did you have something?
I could ask a question. So given that the federal government isn't really stepping up to help people the way that they should, and many local governments aren't doing enough either, philanthropy and private interests are starting to step up to the plate. Are any of you kind of skeptical about how this crisis might strengthen the charter school industry and privatization in general?
Yo, it was halfway through that question. Stacy just like unmuted. She's like, I got this. I got this one.
Man, no.
Dude, I'm not skeptical about philanthropy. I'm pissed off. And let's just keep it 100. Philanthropy is what got us 50 school closings, people coming into communities of color and prescribing something that made them money, but further disenfranchised communities of color. So what does that mean? It means that Bill Gates already know what the flavor of the month is, which is why he's in New York. I'm just saying, check this out. Don't come to Chicago, right? This is not the place. This is not for you. We have to look at Puerto Rico. We have to look at New Orleans about how philanthropy comes in with their giving nature and then turns around and figures out how to plant roots and infrastructure to rob the public sector of workers, to rob the public sector of real service, to rob. And so we have to be clear about rejecting exactly what that is and moving forward with, listen, anytime our country has been in a situation where people have needed more, government didn't get smaller. Rich people didn't just give gifts, they paid more in taxes. Government got bigger and people got more service. And so if we're not clear about the trajectory of this, we have to have better than the New Deal, because the New Deal excluded agricultural workers, it excluded domestic workers. And what we could say now that we can't have like people in the gig economy excluded from, the New Deal, immigrant workers excluded from whatever this New Deal has to be in this moment. So no, I don't want their gift. I want their tax receipts. I don't want their ideas. I want them to take a back seat and listen to the people who have been most impacted by their terrible policies. Remember, these are the very people who have preached the gospel of austerity, which has shredded the safety net, which has defunded special education in the Chicago public schools, which has closed 50 schools in the Chicago public schools. Look, they have a lot of carnage and bad policy that comes before them. We have to reject that. If you can bring a check to give me, you can pay your taxes.
I mean, but I think I think one of the things I'm even thinking about, right, is like, this is kind of a twofold question, right? Is like when we're talking about, revolution, and I believe that, right? Like that we are in a moment of the potential for revolution and all of its messiness and all of its beautiful promise, right? And one of the things that I'm thinking about though is how do we, we're in Chicago though, where every radical activist, every person that's been pushing for revolution was telling this city, don't vote for Lori Lightfoot. And they did, right? And every progressive promise she made on her campaign, she lied about, right? Like she just she straight up did. So like, are we seeing, and I would argue that we're seeing the same kind of disregard for Black and brown life that, that led for a complete disregard of everything that was on her campaign educational platform for why teachers took her to a strike. We're seeing it happen when she allows Little Village to be bombed by Hilco and demolish the Crawford plant. When she's allowing, 70% of the cases of COVID deaths in Chicago to be Black people, when there's still, so when we're saying that, like, how do people, right? Like, what are some of the strategies that the CTU is doing? I know Dr. Stovall, like thinking about the work that you did with Whittier and the moms that were kind of occupying there as well. And, and your research around that stuff. What is like, how do we congeal around this precisely in a moment where we actually are told we can't occupy public space? You know what I'm saying?
This is, and thanks so much for this question, because this is where we get, so right to Stacy's point. So now the disaster capitalists are preying on what's happening in these spaces, and they're preying on our quote unquote inability to move. And I think this is the lesson that we always forget about Harold Washington when we talk about electoral politics. Harold Washington changed the electorate. He literally changed the people who voted. The city of Chicago's voter turnout hovers around 35 to like 37%. Think about that. 35 to 37% of people voting actually decide what happens in the city. Think about if you got that up to 60%. Think about if you got that up to, dare we say, 70%. Literally, if you change the number, there are 250,000 eligible voters in the city of Chicago who did not vote, right? So now when we talk about disorganizing strategy, you're talking about mobilizing a new set of voters. So you're not just getting this same old same, but you're getting a new set of voters, and dare we say, with a new candidate. That's where we think about this work. So what does it mean to get a new set of voters with a new candidate? Harold Washington told Lou Palmer and a number of folks, he said, look, I'm not coming out the house until you get me 150,000 new registered voters, period. I'm not coming out the house. Don't call me. Cancel Christmas. Literally. So now when he got that new set of voters, there was nothing the Verdoli Act 29 could do to stop it. In fact, and I think this is important for your listeners, remember, the city of Chicago changed its voting laws when Harold Washington won in 87. When Harold Washington won for a second time, the city of Chicago said, you now have to win with 50% of the vote plus one, because Harold Washington won it with 39% with a new set of voters. So now history has provided us the fulcrum to say, look, that's what we have to do, right? So if it's this new, think about what mobilizing mail-in voting would do, right? You got more people in one household. Now folks can get those ballots out in different ways. You got a different platform. And I think this current election will actually give us, at the federal level, will give us an idea of how this thing could potentially work. But I think to your point, your question, Ricardo, you have to change who's voting, right? Because that same old same, like, who the fuck knew about Lori Lightfoot? And then all of a sudden she scrapes Tony Preckwinkle in all 77 neighborhood areas, all 50 districts. How the fuck does that happen, right? It only happens because you got 3 people voting, right? So this thing around really thinking about new ways and new strategies, but many of those ways are historical, right? And we have to lean on our history to mobilize in that way.
Yeah. Stacy, I saw that pen go. I saw that note I saw a note to get down.
No, listen, we're going to have something on the ballot in November that is important. It's called a fair tax. Like we legit have to change the structure of taxation in the state of Illinois to a more progressive format where rich people do get to pay more. Right now we're on a flat tax system. And so this whole concept of testing out, but not in this case, it being about our self-interest. Like, think about what happened to the state rolls in 2008 with the recession. Think about what happened to social services under Bruce Rona and how money was just like withheld. Revenues didn't exist. Like, we keep talking about this revolution. We keep talking about rich people paying more. Well, we have a fair tax that is going to be on the ballot. And that has to pass in order for it to get a little bit better, right? And, this whole concept of building revolution, building coalition, I want to be clear. I do believe in an electoral process, but I also believe that this coalition and this movement has to be beyond that, right? Because we see the limitations of the electoral process, and we know that movement has to express in the 360-degree space of people's lives. Also knowing, though, that policymakers get to codify they get to codify budgets that give more to the penal system than they do to education. They get to codify the rules of labor. So yes, it matters. And it also matters that we still have, a group of people who understand that their power, period. Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking a lot about, I think one of the things that we're kind of throwing around a lot, right, is like this notion of one of the things that on a day when Illinois has just announced some of the highest casualties that we've had in COVID-19, like is the idea of that as terrible as things are right now, there's also possibility, right? And so I'm wondering, like, even like what does the other side, what does coming out of this look like, and what are, and we've touching on, but if we could just kind of go a little bit further. And Alicia, I think I'd want to start with you in terms of like thinking about what you're learning about what else school could look like, what else a classroom could look like, and what is the biggest lessons that you've been taking away that of how we need to restructure what learning looks like for youth, or return to what some of the ideas that maybe that might have been had or lost.
Well, thinking about this, what learning can look like, it needs to be, I'm like less structure, but I know we all like our structure as well. But I just think about like student ownership, right? Students leading the way in education and their education, what they want to learn. As I'm at home teaching and supporting my son, I think about that. And we do have days where, we're not going off of what a schedule might look like at school, because this is not school. We're not at school. And we can't do business as usual, right? So I think about that even when we go back to school, like how can I make school more like home more like, how can the two start to blend together so they're not completely separate from each other? Because the one thing they both have in common are the babies, right? I think about my children, I think about my students, and that's the one thing that's in common that makes that connection from home to school. And how can I build that stronger and bring that together? How can students, even at that young age, like decide what they're going to learn for today? And that's something, we've been playing with at home. We choose your own adventure. What do you want to learn today? What is it that's interesting you today? And it comes through noticing things outside, right? Through play. And we have to remember that play is a part of growing up. And that's been taken away a lot, especially in early childhood. Kids have to read by the time they're in kindergarten, before kindergarten. And I think that's something that we have to remember, that play is a way of learning about life. And that's something that we love to do in our home. We like to play, whether it's acting things out or figuring out how I'm going to become a scientist or how I'm going to be an author. You have to make it engaging for the kids so it doesn't feel like work. Go ahead.
No, I think because you were thinking of, you brought up this moment yesterday, which is before, like when the pandemic was looming, and and there was kind of the stay at home orders were going to be kind of issued, that, in preparation, you took your 6-year-olds, right, your first graders into the computer lab. And then there was a moment where you were like, I know better. This is not developmentally appropriate. Can you talk a little bit about this though? Because I think
Yes.
One of the things that's something that as a person that works with that also, has worked with over 5,000 young people in the city of Chicago, right? I don't even consider that. And I don't even think parents understand that level of thinking that actually a teacher, is doing. Can you talk just a little bit of that?
Yeah, for sure. Right when this began, my first goal was what resources can I give my students so that they can take it home and try and utilize that, right? So of course, thinking about going into the computer lab and thinking that I'm going to show them how to use Google Classroom. I'm going to show them how to get on, because I've used it in the past before when I've taught older kids. And I said, I'm going to set this up. This will be great. And then afterwards, I was like, that wasn't right. I was setting them up, yes, but I also remember I haven't trained parents on how to do this. I don't know if parents can do this. So now I'm expecting my 6 and 7-year-olds to show their parents how to do this. And they just learned this in an emergency situation, right? Because this is what we're doing. It's emergency teaching. And that's what I was doing at that point. I was going in and saying, here's what I think we can do in this case. We need it. Let me show it to you. And of course I've come in these past 7-8 weeks, we've come a long way. We've come forward with it. And I've been able to reach out to parents and get parents online and talk to them about what they're struggling with and what would make it easier. But yeah, just remembering what's developmentally appropriate for them. So that way we are giving in this moment the appropriate learning task, the appropriate ideas in order to distribute through a video screen. And then remembering afterwards, keeping it developmentally appropriate, not doing things out of convenience.
Yeah, and I want to, Stacy and Dave, I want to, keep that conversation going of what else could kind of school look like, or what else should school look like? I know you mentioned the standardized test, David, but what are some of the other things you've thought about?
I think there's a thing that we can begin to think about, and there's already infrastructure here in Chicago to make it happen. So in the early 2000s, there was conversations. There's a place called the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and they had a initiative to make Chicago a completely Wi-Fi accessible city. And that infrastructure is still there. Nobody moved on it because the cable providers and telephone companies would not agree to actually release the access to those particular towers or what have you. So this thing around, when we talk about before COVID, 60% of CPS students were accessing internet outside of the schoolhouse via phone, right? So now if we're talking about these spaces, and I know there's been computer handouts and tablet handouts or what have you, but when we talk about really talking about having access, I think something like free Wi-Fi, where the infrastructure and planning is already there, could easily happen, right? I think this isn't some far-fetched thing. And actually, in the early 2000s, it was New York City, Portland, and Chicago. Portland was the only city that followed through. So when you go to Portland, Portland has access, free Wi-Fi access at any part of the city, right? And it comes to the residents of Portland at no cost. So now even in their taxes, right? It was agreed upon by the cable providers to provide this for the city. So this thing could potentially happen. But again, back to Stacy's point, the window is small to push it. But there's actually some precedent with this in terms of when you look at cable companies and we think about public access television. Public access television comes by way of a policy that every cable provider has to put in money to a public access fund. Now, Rona tried to take that away, but luckily it was actually revisited and the funds were replenished. But I think this thing around thinking about things that we already have structures for, that we can get moving. And I think this is the way for us to think about what's viable and what's necessary, because I'm thinking about those families who are in schools that have been depopulated, who have been in spaces where the school population has been just as decimated as the housing population. So this thing around activating a place like something like free Wi-Fi to make sure that folks have this access. And again, the infrastructure is there. This is literally around flipping a switch. And I think it's important for your viewers to get a sense of that, because what we're talking about is a lot of things that are accessible. It just takes the human will to make those things happen.
And there was actually a proposal in City Council maybe 3-4 weeks ago for there to be universal internet access in Chicago. And this was proposed by Alderman George Cardenas, which I felt was kind of random because he normally goes along with making the lights up. Right? So it might have been a PR move. I don't know what happened to that.
Yeah, and like I said, and it's all this back and forth. I mean, we're talking about now 20 years of legislation around this, because the argument is really around just flipping on a switch, because Cardenas could actually argue for that because he knew it didn't cost any money. It's literally an agreement to just flip on a switch and everybody has access. I mean, it is literally that simple.
Which is why they were running to just give out these little hotspots, right? Exactly. Because again, I don't want your philanthropy. I want your investment, and your investment comes in that you got to give what we got to give in this space to the public sector. So I just think, to David's point, it's about political will, but this larger thought process of how are we transforming our school communities at the same time our larger community is being transformed is very important. So, you think about this whole concept of intrinsic motivation and how we encounter our students in our classrooms. One of the biggest debates that we're having inside of our union is this whole concept of grading and how grades, are motivators for some students. And so then in a time where we're dealing with the pandemic, and if we're so hyper focused on a grade, I think we're missing something about humanity. Honestly, if you can't get it done today, you can't get it done today. Let's try again tomorrow. It is a pandemic, people. We should be giving everyone a check to deal with a pandemic. Everyone should get a check, regardless if they're laid off, if they're working, whatever. Everyone should get a check. Everyone's rent should be suspended. The mortgages should be suspended and forgiven, for that matter. Like, if we really want to talk about how do we make people well and center humanity, give them shelter, make sure that they have an income, make sure that they are fed, and make sure that they can like be able to deal with like the crazy that's surrounding us. So that's one, that's that larger community piece. Because when I hear the mayor talk about we're going to get childcare centers open, that ain't because childcare centers opening and the workers in the childcare center, that's because they about to call our Black asses back to work. And they know we got kids too. And so, yes, let's get that started up again. But we haven't talked about expanding sick pay or sick days for workers, because Alicia would tell you how many students come into her classroom sick because they don't have grandparents to send them to. They don't have sick days to stay home with their children. So you can't talk about reopening the economy if you can't talk to me about Medicare for all or expanding county care. You can't talk to me about reopening if you're not talking to me about expanding the number of sick days that I can get. Look, let's keep it 100. Basic universal income for the next 2 years. Bottom line, right? Mm-hmm. Let's also talk about this. Not only does every kid need a device, we need Wi-Fi. We also need to provide our workers in the schools with, space and time to innovate, right? I don't want Bill Gates innovating. I want Alicia innovating. I want Alicia, leading curriculum and best practices and webinars with parents and students and her colleagues. That's what I want. And it's possible because Alicia's doing the work right now, and all of her colleagues across this country, quite frankly. And so it's up to labor and the teachers unions. And yes, I'm calling us out. We're going to have to say, Bill Gates, take several seats. And
several.
All of the seats.
Right.
All of them.
Buy your ass the Chicago Theater and sit in every single one of them seats.
Right. All of them.
And Alicia gets to lead this reimagination with her colleagues of what this looks like, right? Because one, I don't trust him, and two, he doesn't know. He just has money, right? Pay your taxes and Alicia can figure it out. So that's one. Two, how do we figure out schools? If we're concerned about the disproportionate number of Black and Latinx people with COVID, we're also concerned about those trailers that our students are being instructed in on the southeast side of town and on the southwest side of town, because that's where we have large percentages of students in oversized classrooms, right? How do you social distance in a classroom of 40? How do you social distance in a classroom of 35? How do you have, you cannot, right? Think about a high school. I taught high school history, and I'm thinking right now about a hallway during passing period.
Man.
Right?
What?
And so we had a mayor that was reluctant to close schools, a mayor who wanted schools to be reopened in June so we could have end of the year celebrations with all of what we know about this disease, right?
Right.
And this is if you legit could have told me that today I would be saying that the white billionaire governor has had the back of public school students and educators more than the Black, female, queer mayor of Chicago, I would have called you a liar. And it's the truth, right? We had to fight to even get schools closed. So you know what's about to go down when we're talking through how do we reconfigure schools to deal with the reality that this virus is killing people and we don't know who has it. And we don't have enough nurses to take temperatures. We don't have enough janitors in our school communities to clean them. We don't have, and then they don't even have enough supplies because remember, austerity. We privatized janitorial services in the Chicago public schools, and we have citations from the Chicago Health Department. Look, it was insufficient in the beginning. Today, it could be deadly.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, we're winding down on time, so I want to, Charles and Jackie, you guys want to, you guys got any other questions you want to share? You want to ask?
Oh, I was just thinking, how can we support teachers in this moment? I know, like, piggybacking off of what Stacy said in terms of like how CTU has been organizing, but the mayor has even like showed reluctance to even talk to educators and talk to teachers in this moment. And I know sometimes that hostility can trickle down when you have the highest office in the city saying, I don't want to deal with educators in this moment, and also pointed the blame at educators during the strike. So how do we talk to people, parents at home, to have them actually like focus on the systems that are at play and not so much have this individual hostility towards teachers and educators?
Yeah, and I think that's like why I think Charles' question is so important, because it's like, it's so, even like Stacy saying like we're in a revolution, right? And it's not even that people that romanticize revolution can't identify it because because they actually didn't live through it. It's also like everyday people don't even think it's possible. It's why when we're in this moment that people are like, yo, let's get back to normal. Let's get back to normal, right? And so I even think, I know even me, right, who's like a goddamn academic that reads about revolutionary education, social movements, right? Even yesterday when we were talking and just even hearing stuff about like free Wi-Fi, right? Like for the city, and abolishing standardized testing, right? And actually grades, or one of the conversations we had, Alicia, me and you, was about the way that centering social emotional behavioral learning, which Stacy is also what you're talking about like, like the humanity, right? And learning those things. And so I think like, to getting back to Charles' question, this idea of like, how do we talk to people about how to support this movement in a real way, right? Because I think they would, right? I think hearing these things sound right to them,
Free Wi-Fi? Hell yeah.
Right, just on top. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that comes to mind, and a comrade, Monique Rideau, who actually works with the efforts for community schools, she talks about this, and I think it's really important. How are we having conversations with families around what their needs are? And then when we have that conversation with families around what their needs are, now we can begin to point folks to resources. So to Charles's question, I think this really becomes important, because let's talk about it real, right? You're hella frustrated, right? Think about it. You might have had a dehumanizing experience in school, and now you got babies in the house, and you're like, oh shit, right? Like this now the realness becomes even realer, right? And I think it's really around talking with folks through those frustrations, right? Saying, okay, we got a lot of stuff here. Okay, what's needed? Now, from the need, we can figure out all these particular resources, right? Because I think that initial conversation is critical, because frustration and stress levels are so high right now.
I agree. I think it is starting with families, talking, I know, like, I appreciate all family support, but I know I have to support you too. So what is it that's causing the frustration? What is it that's causing you not to want to do this, right? Because this is where we're at. And I think that's something even moving forward as we're planning, is families need to be considered. I keep hearing about how schools are going to be restructured next year, and there's been half-day models or every other day models. How does that help our working families? They're not being considered when those decisions are even being played with, right? Because they're working. Who's going to take care of them? I'm thinking about my own child. Like, I'm going to be taking him to school, and then I have to worry about where he's going tomorrow, because he won't be, that's his off day. And so that just doesn't make sense to me. So we really need to include families in the conversation. Where are you at? What is it that you need so that we can support you better? What can I teach you? What learning extra tools do you need? Because that becomes a thing too. Because even when I think about the Wi-Fi, right? Families getting these laptops, and then they don't know how to connect to the internet. And now they're connected to the internet. Now what, right? If they don't have this experience with this technology, what use is it to them? So I feel that that's important.
One of the things I thought was so interesting when you were saying how you can tell when a student has a computer at home, because it's if you get the assignment and it's like horizontal screen or landscape scene versus portrait screen, which means they were shooting it with their phone, or things like that. And I think that's so real, right? Like,
Yeah, and that's like a real quick and formal way to take analysis of what students need, right? If they're doing it on a cell phone from a parent or a grandparent or whomever's watching them, like you can see that right away just because it's in portrait mode.
Right. And so is there like, do you feel like the city has an obligation and can do very specific things to kind of provide young people with those resources? Right. I mean, because we just keep on hearing they're broke.
How? I mean, look, and I said this during the strike. We build skyscrapers downtown.
Mm-hmm.
We do. Like, we have subsidized the development of downtown, the South Loop and the West Loop, Fulton District. We are subsidizing that. And then we're lamenting and begging for like rich people to give Black kids on the South Side, Latinx kids on the Southwest Side, a computer. No, that's a priority mix up right there. And look,
but also we'd have to acknowledge that if we gave them those resources, they might not be the people that are on the front line of the pandemic as essential workers that are the ones that are risking their lives. Right. And so it's like, and so it's so interesting because one of the things that I forget sometimes that like not everybody grew up in a progressive radical household or has been like in the Young Communist League when they were 15, right? And so like I go around and I talk to like people who I like, who I know, who I love, and like they're like, well, yeah, but aren't the teachers asking for too much, right? And they're not even making some of these kind of like connections, right? Yeah. And they don't even, and they're even unaware that their taxes are subsidizing corporations, like giving Hilco a $20 million tax abatement just so a year later they can actually blanket Little Village in particular matter and contaminate the water. I'm sorry, Stacy, for interrupting.
No, I mean, that's exactly right. That's not a sorry for interrupting. That's what you were supposed to do. Look, people have value. And that's what we're experiencing in this moment over and over again, is like humanity not being centered. Listen, like this whole concept of young people being talked at and not included. Chicago has, a space where democracy is not available to all of us. Like, we don't even have functioning local school councils in the places that need it the most because they're on probation or because of the school rating system have snatched that away from them. So how can parents actually participate in how that budget reflects the needs of the school community and remote learning for this upcoming school year if their LSC doesn't exist? AUSL doesn't even have local school councils. The charter schools, they don't have local school councils. You already know we're under mayoral control and we don't have an elected school board. So we have all of these impediments that are baked into the system, institutionalized, that keep the voices of the parents who need to have the largest voice right now outside of school policy. And now is the time where we need it the most. So the frustration, like, we have to be clear about centering the frustration in the places that have created policies that disenfranchise us further. That's one thing. And then two, keep it 100. Capitalism has always built into it the death of people. From the Middle Passage to the immigrant workers that are disposable, they'll put them in a concentration camp when they have enough on the farms in California, right? So we have to be clear that we are already dealing with a thing that doesn't respect humanity. And the humanity that we try to grab hold to, we are ashamed from it. Think about what that kid said to the mayor on the West Side a couple weekends ago. He said, you got a job to do to cure this, to solve this, so we can be outside. He had on gloves and a mask. They were social distancing, but the headlines were so wrong. Like, he shouldn't have been speaking to her like that. He shouldn't have been outside. He shouldn't have been that. But you put a side-by-side picture up with where they were and what they were doing, the number of people that were out there, how they were protected versus what was happening on the north side of town, right? At the same damn time. But it was okay for her to chastise that young kid because he was Black, because he was male, because it was on the West Side. Remember, she had just finished the press conference talking about she was going to put Black people in jail. Meanwhile, she negotiating with folks up in Albany Park who visit Albany Park, don't even live there, to go to church. Like, listen, if Rahm Emanuel was the mayor of Chicago doing this stuff right now, baby, Al Sharpton to be here.
Right.
Come on now.
Right.
You know, and so again, and I know this is a bit off, but all of the plans that are being created in this moment have to be vetted for white supremacy, have to be vetted for racism, have to be vetted for continued oppression of the very people who need the most. Like, you can't tell me that the reopening plan for Chicago is going to be worth anything when you got George Bush, the first one, his chief of staff running it, who belongs to a golf club that don't even let women on the premises.
Right.
To this day.
To this day.
Right. You know, I mean, like, you know, we got to put that in context, right? I mean, like, what does it mean? Like, you, Ricardo, this is a question, you said it yesterday when we were talking about, I think this is a question that I've been asking in my work for the last couple of years. What does it mean to exist in a city that shows you at every juncture how much it hates you? Right? What does it mean to live under those conditions? And now, because you live under those conditions, what does it mean to change your reality? Right. And I think that's the crux of this work, right? When we bring out the facts and we bring out the ways in which this is positioned, school is connected to housing, is connected to healthcare, is connected to food service. We need to understand how those connections play themselves out in our daily lives. I think this moment forces us from the theoretical to the practical. How are we understanding our everyday? And who were the people who will be with us in their everyday? Because now it is clear only us will free us. And I think that's an important sign that I think folks are now starting to understand in real ways. And you really understand it when you got babies at the house and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do. So you call Alicia like, yo, I'm on the struggle bus. Mm-hmm. I need some help. What can I do? And what that is, that mutual aid, that solidarity is the larger demonstration of what we can be doing across the city, right? Because now it's clear, it's evident, it's in our face, but we have these resources, the humanity of us, that allow us to now think about our work in a very different way.
That's true, because, you know, only us can free us. Like, I was like, I'm gonna free myself of any obligation to be professional or appropriate and just show up in my robe now to these episodes. And if I want to show a little shoulder, I can. And if I want to take it back, I will.
Right. That's what it is. That's what it is.
So we're at time, but I just want to want like one sentence, right? Because I know that there are so many people that are going to be that are going to watch this and that are already tuning in right now. And so, like, what's the one sentence you want them to like close out on, that you want them to take away? Yeah,
I think about the work of Arundhati Roy, who is an Indian scholar who's working in a lot of spaces when folks dealing with poverty. She says, either way, change will come. It could be bloody or it could be beautiful. It depends on us.
We deserve recovery first.
Alicia?
I think it's the humanity and the wellness of everyone. Families, take care of your family first and foremost before anything else. That's most important.
I'm glad that you feel that way, because I'm your cousin. So if I need some money, if I need something, I'm gonna call you, because you know you about that life all of a sudden.
Real talk, right?
Thank you all so much. This was such an awesome conversation. I know Charles and Jackie, y'all feel the same, right? And we were so excited for this show. I know our audience was looking forward to this show. I want to invite you all to stick around, as Jackie's going to give us some updates, and I'm going to close us out with the Rona reflection. This is where it comes in handy to have your own piña colada at home right now. All right.
Cheers.
Hey, yo.
Hey.
It's all around. It's all around.
Take us away, Jackie. What are some updates for our audience this evening?
Okay, so this week, Mayor Lori Lightfoot put out a survey for all Chicagoans, and she announced it again today in her Latinx-focused virtual town hall. And its purpose is to collect feedback from residents about the stay-at-home order, as well as her multi-phase plan to reopen the economy. And it's not like people haven't been voicing the need for rental and mortgage forgiveness, as well as accessible healthcare and so on, right? So it's kind of unclear what response she's expecting to get, and if the city actually intends on delivering on people's suggestions. But anyway, this is something that this is an opportunity to tell her how you really feel. And I would suggest looking out for that form, either to participate or to keep her accountable. There are 5 new testing sites in the city with a focus on Black and Brown communities. This was a city initiative that was possible due to the intervention of the Reverend Jesse Jackson and his Rainbow Push organization, who was able to connect the city to donors and philanthropy out in the West Coast. These new testing sites are in Little Village, specifically Saucedo Academy, in Belmont Cragen at Dr. Prieto Academies, in Englewood at Kennedy King College, in Gage Park at Senka Park, and in Pullman in Gately Park. There is also a new mutual aid fund specifically geared towards street vendors like eloteras, tamaleras, and so forth, given that we know that undocumented people don't qualify for any federal relief and not much relief at the city or state level either. So there's an initiative of Increase the Peace, and there is a GoFundMe going around for people to donate into that fund, as well as an application form for vendors who are experiencing any type of need so that they can apply for those funds. This fund is not confined to any one neighborhood, so look out for the links in the comments. I did announce this before, but I want to reiterate that food stamp benefits have been expanded by the Department of Agriculture to include any families with school-aged children. So any parents who are watching this show, if you do not already have the link card, you can fill out a simplified application in the state website. And if you already have SNAP, you should have gotten those deposits since March. And then finally, there are other mutual aid efforts that actually deliver food to people's homes. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of 61st Street Market, of New Life Churches, and the Getting Grown Collective. So anybody who's watching, if we missed any mutual aid efforts, please add them to the comments. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Jackie, everybody, and check out the latest issue of the Southside Weekly. It's weekly, so they bust them out every week, just like pandemic issues, and they're always giving resources like this. Thank you so much. We've arrived to the close of our show, which is the Rona Reflection, where either me or Charles kind of give some final thoughts we want you all to think about at the close of the show. Tonight, me toca a mí, and I'm going to be sharing that. Originally, I had written a piece that was all about kind of revolutionary education and the traditions of kind of outside the system education in the hemispheric Americas. And then yesterday when we were talking, I realized how dire the circumstances are because of the fact of who this mayor is. And so before I go off into that flight of imagination, I think it's really important to have restructured this commentary to talk about what's happening now. So I'm going to present tonight's Rona Reflection. Lori Lightfoot hates Black and brown children. I am not saying that as a joking riff off of Kanye's call out of George Bush during Hurricane Katrina. I'm a scholar. I'm trained to look at the evidence and make claims based on that. Up until now, Lori Lightfoot's contempt for Black and brown children has been on display, particularly when it comes to education. Just last year, the mayor forced teachers into a strike when she betrayed her own campaign promises and refused to provide necessary resources and personnel like nurses and social workers to ensure student learning and well-being. That Lightfoot would fight to withhold the city's wealth from Chicago schools where 85% of students are Black and Latinx is not coincidence, it's correlation. Lightfoot's disregard for Black and brown youth has only been magnified during COVID-19. She allowed multinational Hillco to demolish the Crawford plant and contaminate water and cover with particular matter the Mexican-American neighborhood Little Village that also contains one of the city's largest populations of teens. Lightfoot determinedly made a media spectacle and publicly shamed Black youth at a park who were in fact wearing masks for not staying home when she could have just as easily walked down the block from City Hall to admonish mostly white yuppies crowding parks in the West Loop, flaunting strollers and puppies. When she isn't endangering, depriving, or scolding Black and brown youth, Lightfoot is engaging in her trusty pastime of criminalizing them. This week, Lightfoot was sympathetic to white parishioners in Albany Park who violated stay-at-home orders to congregate and said she would not arrest them. This is the exact opposite reaction she had to Black teens congregating at a party a week ago when she threatened, "We will arrest you," and that's a quote. Since stay-at-home orders, activists have called out disproportionate police presence in predominantly Black and brown communities on the South and West Side. The mayor denies any disparity and even framed her ambush of those Black youth at the park as care for Black Chicago. But if Lightfoot cared about Black or brown Chicago so much, why has she not done anything for Black and brown youth, especially during this pandemic? Lightfoot wasted no time in using this pandemic to demand and consolidate unprecedented power. Why has she not issued rent and mortgage excusal to provide housing security for the families of Black and brown youth? Why has she not flooded Black and brown communities being hit hardest by COVID-19 and carrying its death toll with resources for testing and therapy where children are ridden with anxiety or grief? The most Chicago mayoral aspect of Lightfoot is perhaps this disregard for the lives and well-being of Black and brown youth. After all, this is the city that shut down dozens of schools and mental health clinics in their neighborhoods. This is the city that conspired to cover up the police slaughter of 15-year-old Laquan McDonald and did nothing for so many other Black boys killed by police like Ronnie Mann or Pierre Lowry. Lightfoot's summit to end poverty seems like an empty gesture when she has still done nothing to improve the conditions of half of all Black boys in Chicago that are out of school and work. Chicago's mayor might not love Black and brown youth, but I do. I know our guests tonight, Stacy Davis Gates, David Stovall, and Alicia Torres do. Parents who are risking their lives as essential workers to make minimum wage just to feed their Black and brown children love them. Teachers staying up at night thinking how they can center students of color and their learning and their needs during this pandemic do. I'm sure many of you that are watching right now and at home do too. And this is a good thing because our Black and brown youth need us now more than ever, and they are going to need us even more still when this pandemic subsides. The reality is that those in power from Puerto Rico to New Orleans have used natural disasters like hurricanes to further deprive working people of color with resources while redirecting city wealth, our money, to private interests like developers through contracts. It will be no different with this pandemic. And when the city opens up as Black and brown communities struggle to rebuild is precisely when they will come harder for us and our youth. And we are going to have to fight and let them know this is not child's play. Like Stacy Davis Gates said in our conversation yesterday and today, it's revolution. Thank you all so much for tuning into the Hoodoisie. I want to thank our guests, David Stovall, Alicia Torres, and Stacy Davis Gates so much. You are all three of you are my own personal heroes, and I know you mean so much to the students and the people that have come into contact with you. I want to thank my co-host and collaborative loves of my life, Charles Preston and Jackie Serrato. I want to thank the Hoodoisie team that helps put this together, Yasmin Zacarias, I'm all kind of like emotional right now. Yasmin and Janie, who manage our social media and produce the shows. Tune in next week. We're going to be exploring rent. We'll have Nancy Meza from Defend Poyle Heights and some other guests that'll be on the show as well. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Leave some comments below. We love you all. And also, we released some guides for our audience that you can download at a Google link. Guides on everything from coping and surviving strategies if you're a young person that has to shelter in a place that doesn't feel like shelter. A healing toolkit for the new world to prepare yourself. It's written by all Hoodoisie past guests and collective members. So check that out as well. One more time, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank all of you for being on the show and making the show so much. See you all next week.